My wife used my Face ID to send $10,000 to her lover. She said, "Prove it." I replied, "I don't have to." I didn't call the police. I gave the bank's fraud department the phone's biometric authentication log, turning her affair into a federal wire fraud case. The worst thing you can do as a cybersecurity engineer is get lazy with your own perimeter security. And I got lazy, not with a password, but with my face. I'm Ethan, 35. I spend my days in Silicon Valley designing encryption protocols. My specialty is identifying and patching vulnerabilities before they crash the system. I married Lila 3 years ago. She was 33, beautiful, and absolutely obsessed with convenience. She hated PIN codes. She hated strong passwords. Early in our marriage, she convinced me to enable Face ID for all my banking apps on my phone. "It's just easier, Ethan," she argued. "You're always working. I need to pay the bills quickly." I agreed. That was the first fatal flaw in my personal security architecture. I trusted her, so I granted her permission to bypass my strongest layer of defense, my own biometric data. The foundation of our conflict was hidden financial erosion. Lila worked in real estate, constantly pushing for high-end spending while contributing minimally to our actual savings. I started noticing the small, unexplained cash withdrawals. She always had a ready explanation. Taxes, client closing gifts, or a spontaneous weekend trip I needed for my mental health. I was too busy coding to audit every single lie. The pressure intensified when I landed a major contract. Suddenly, our bank account was flooded with liquidity. And that's when Lila saw an opportunity, viewing my success not as our shared victory, but as a liability she could tap into. She started taking urgent client calls on weekends. Her phone was constantly buzzing, and her replies were always cryptic. I ignored it, telling myself the stress of my new contract was making me paranoid. The confrontation came late on a Friday night. I was asleep on the sofa, utterly exhausted. I woke up to a faint clicking sound coming from the kitchen. Lila was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling rapidly on her phone. My phone. The screen lit up my face as she angled the device, using my sleeping face to authorize a transaction. I watched her complete the transfer. She had opened my main investment account. She transferred $10,000. She didn't know I was awake. She didn't know the transfer was successful. She just quietly put the phone back on the charging dock and slipped into bed, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just witnessed the theft of my money and the total collapse of our marriage. The next morning, I confronted her, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I opened the account. $10,000 is missing. You transferred it last night. She didn't even flinch. She looked me dead in the eye and delivered the final insult that turned the whole affair into a federal case. "Prove it," she said. "You were asleep. You don't have the password. You're just being jealous, Ethan. You can't prove I did anything." I realized I wasn't just dealing with a thief. I was dealing with a criminal who believed her perfect lie was impenetrable. I was about to show her the true power of a security analyst. "Prove it," she said. That was her mistake. The second those two words left her mouth, I stopped being a husband. I became the chief security officer of my own financial life. I went straight to my home office. I didn't yell. I didn't even file for divorce yet. My immediate goal was to prove the impossibility of her denial. As a data security expert, I knew the phone had a record of the transaction. Not just the time, but the authentication method. I accessed the phone's internal diagnostics using my laptop. It was a complex bypass, but my job is to exploit weaknesses. I found the log I needed, The bank app recorded a successful authentication via biometric data, Face ID, at exactly 2:47 a.m. That was the moment I was asleep on the couch, exhausted from work. And the log showed the phone was unlocked and held at an unusual vertical angle, consistent with being held over a face. The data didn't lie. Her denial was physically impossible. She leveraged my sleeping body to steal $10,000. I now had the smoking gun, but I wasn't done. I wanted the full narrative. I cross-referenced the $10,000 transfer destination, an account under the name of Mark Peterson. Mark Peterson, the life coach. The one she said was just a friend who needed business advice. I accessed Mark's public business profiles. His social media was suddenly filled with pictures of expensive equipment and a new lease for a high-end office suite. The timeline matched the withdrawal perfectly. The motive was clear. She didn't steal for herself. She stole to fund Mark's luxury startup. The audacity of it made me laugh, a short, bitter sound. She treated my love like a personal ATM and my sleeping face like a debit card. I knew if I called the police, they would treat it as a domestic dispute. They would ask about passwords and shared access, muddying the water. I needed to bypass the local system and hit them with the heavy artillery. I called my contact at the bank's central fraud department, a woman who understands the severity of digital compromise. "This is not a divorce issue," I explained, keeping my voice cold and precise. "This is wire fraud." The funds were transferred across state lines under false, unauthorized biometric authentication. I can provide the biometric log, the IP location, and the timestamp of the unauthorized facial scan. The bank's response was instantaneous and serious. They saw not a jealous husband, but a system breach involving federal banking laws. They didn't call the local police. They called the FBI Cybercrime Division. Lila wanted proof. I was about to give her proof that carried the weight of federal prison time. The next day, my life officially turned into an episode of a crime drama. The FBI Cybercrime Unit took the case with chilling professionalism. They didn't see a marriage dispute. They saw a high-value system exploit and a clear case of felony wire fraud. My job suddenly became working with law enforcement instead of against system failures. It was surreal. I provided them with the full biometric authentication log, the 2:47 a.m. timestamp, the IP location, and the crucial metadata showing the device was held at the specific vertical angle necessary for a sleeping face scan. That log was my silver bullet. It proved the unauthorized access with scientific certainty. The FBI confirmed that the $10,000 was immediately transferred across state lines, from my New York bank to a non-local account controlled by Mark Peterson. Mark, the life coach, wasn't just committing adultery. He was committing interstate financial crime using my face as his key. My investigators didn't stop there. We followed the money. We discovered Mark had used the $10,000 to put a large deposit down on a high-end personal training studio in Miami, the exact city Lila kept taking wellness conferences in. The audacity of it. They were building their new, shared future with my money. Meanwhile, I had to keep a straight face at home. Lila was acting completely normal, demanding to know if I was finally going to apologize for my paranoia. "Ethan, you need to call your lawyer and tell him you're dropping the divorce," she commanded. "This is insane. You're ruining your life over a mistake." She still believed I couldn't prove anything. She believed my silence meant I was beaten. I looked at the woman who was unknowingly the target of a federal investigation. I replied with the only truth I could give her. "I'm not making a mistake, Lila. I'm just waiting for the final report to come in." The bank, cooperating fully with the FBI, flagged Mark's account immediately. They froze the remaining funds and revoked the lease financing for his new studio. The collapse was about to be total, and it was going to hit Mark first. Then Lila. I had everything I needed. The biometric evidence, the wire transfer confirmation, and the absolute certainty that justice would be served by the most powerful authorities in the country. Lila wanted proof. I was about to give her proof that arrived in handcuffs. The phone rang that afternoon, and I almost laughed out loud. It wasn't Lila calling me to apologize. It was Mark Peterson, the life coach, the guy who was supposed to be financing his new gym with my money. He was completely panicked. His usual confident, smooth voice was replaced by a trembling mess of fear. "Ethan, man, what did you do? The bank just froze my entire business account," he shrieked. "I can't access the lease deposit." I stayed silent for a second, letting the beautiful sound of his distress sink in. I was sitting in my car, parked near my lawyer's office, and I could finally feel the weight shifting. "I didn't do anything, Mark," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I just told the bank the truth about the source of the funds for that new gym studio." "What truth? That it was a gift?" "Lila said it was a gift. You signed the papers." "I signed the papers as a co-signer on a loan for a business asset, Mark. I didn't sign off on a fraudulent transfer of funds to a personal account across state lines." I let the word fraudulent hang in the air. He was a savvy businessman. He knew exactly what that implied. He started begging. "Look, I'll pay you back the 10 grand. Just call the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." "I can't do that, Mark. I don't work for the bank. You need to talk to the FBI Cybercrime Division." The mention of the FBI hit him like a physical punch. "The FBI? Are you insane? This is a civil dispute." "It became federal when the funds crossed state lines under false pretenses and unauthorized biometric authentication," I explained, using my most clinical, emotionless auditor voice. "You're dealing with wire fraud now, Mark. Not a petty divorce." He hung up. The sound of silence was glorious. I knew the chaos would immediately land on Lila. I drove home and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by her charging cables, mascara streaks running down her cheeks. She was hysterical. "Mark called me. What did you tell him? Why are the feds involved?" she screamed, grabbing my arm. I calmly pulled my arm away. "I didn't tell him anything, Lila. I just gave the bank the biometric log of the phone you held over my face at 2:47 a.m. last Friday." Her face went pale, the color of pure, unadulterated terror. She realized I hadn't just suspected her. I had data on her crime. She tried to fight back with her usual defense. "You're sick, Ethan. You're the one with the problem. You're making this up." "The FBI is not interested in my feelings, Lila," I said, walking past her to the study. "They are interested in your felony." I knew the battle was over. The physical manifestation of their affair, the studio, was gone, and their freedom was severely compromised. I filed for divorce that afternoon, securing the final piece of paper that gave me my life back. "You're dealing with wire fraud now, Mark. Not a petty divorce." That was the last conversation Mark ever had with me. After that, the system took over. I spent the next 2 days working directly with the FBI Cybercrime Division. They weren't interested in my feelings. They were interested in the biometric authentication log and the interstate wire transfer. I felt like I was back in college, pulling an all-nighter for a critical security audit. Except this time, the consequences were measured in federal prison time. My job was to provide them with the perfect chain of evidence: the GPS pings, the exact time the fraudulent transfer was made, and confirmation that Mark had already leased the studio space. Lila, meanwhile, was experiencing total, controlled isolation. She didn't know I had filed for divorce. She only knew her lover's bank account was frozen and he was blaming her entirely. She showed up at the condo on Wednesday, her face drawn, trying one last desperate plea. "Ethan, Mark is saying you called the feds. You have to stop them. He's willing to pay you back. He needs that studio." "He needs that studio for your financial future, Lila," I said, my voice completely emotionless. "I know. I can't stop them, Lila. I reported a federal crime. I don't work for the FBI. You need to talk to a defense attorney." She tried to turn the situation around, falling back on her classic script. "You're doing this because you're jealous. You're ruining my chance at happiness because you're afraid to be alone. I'm securing my financial future, Lila. That's the only thing that matters now." I knew the FBI was closing in on Mark. They tracked the location of his new studio and his current movements. My lawyer advised me to file the official divorce papers concurrently with the arrest. We needed maximum leverage and minimal contact. The most satisfying part was the logistics of the sting operation. The FBI planned to arrest Mark at the gym, his source of clients and credibility. But they needed confirmation that Lila was physically separated from the asset, the condo, to prevent her from tampering with evidence. I told them I would be leaving the condo at 10 a.m. sharp Friday morning for a weekend conference. Lila, desperate to access her clothes and bank records, would leave immediately after me. The final trap was set. I walked out, gave the FBI the all-clear signal, and let them execute the double takedown. I drove straight to the office of my attorney, where the signed divorce papers were waiting. I was leaving the chaos behind, confident that the cold, hard logic of the system would deliver the justice I deserved. The clock hit 10 a.m. Friday morning. That was my cue. I walked out of the condo with my travel bag, giving Lila a quick, neutral nod. "See you Sunday," I lied. She was waiting for the elevator, already dressed in her workout gear, planning to rush to Mark's studio to figure out the frozen accounts. She barely looked at me. I drove 2 blocks, pulled into a public parking garage, and called the FBI contact. "The package is mobile," I confirmed. "Execute." My job was done. Now the system had to run its course. I drove straight to my lawyer's office to sign the final divorce papers. The silence of the firm was a welcome contrast to the chaos I'd just left. While I was signing the final asset disclosures, the detonation happened across the city. The first text came from a mutual friend. "Did you hear? The cops just swarmed the core strength gym. Mark is being arrested in the parking lot." I didn't flinch. I just handed my lawyer the signed documents. The FBI timed the arrest perfectly. Mark was taken into custody in front of his high-paying clients, shattering his facade of success and credibility. The bigger chaos, the one that hit Lila directly, occurred 15 minutes later. She was probably rushing to the gym, frantic to talk to Mark, when her own arrest went down. The FBI had tracked her cell tower. They pulled her over quietly on the highway, ensuring the arrest wasn't a public spectacle. But the consequence was no less severe. I got the update from my lawyer's phone call. "Ethan, Mark Peterson is in custody for wire fraud, and your wife Lila has also been detained. She wasn't arrested for cheating. She was arrested for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and unauthorized biometric access to a financial institution." The system didn't care about their feelings. It cared about the felony. I felt the blood rush to my ears, a mix of vindication and profound sadness for the years lost. I finished signing the last page of the divorce petition. "It's finalized," I told my lawyer. The financial ties are cut. My lawyer looked at me, serious. You know, Ethan, she wasn't charged with simple theft. They went federal. They used your biometric log as the primary evidence. She couldn't have proven you did it, but she couldn't prove you didn't. That was the power of her stupidity. She didn't realize the log of her own face was the data point that put her in federal custody. I walked out of the law office a single man, financially whole, and ethically justified. The battle had been won not by anger, but by the cold, precise certainty of my security expertise. I drove away from the city, leaving behind the two people who had mocked my intelligence, now facing the ultimate consequence of their arrogant betrayal. The worst sound in the world is the silence after the federal agents hang up the phone. That's the sound of total finality, man. You know they're not coming back. I didn't wait for the trial. I didn't need to see Lila convicted. The job was done the second I drove out of San Francisco. I sold the condo immediately. The place was tainted by the memory of her holding the phone over my sleeping face. I couldn't live there anymore. The equity from the sale, minus my lawyer fees, was clean. I used it to buy a small, quiet house in the mountains outside Tahoe. I needed air that didn't feel like it was watching me. My life became a beautiful, simplified routine. Coding, hiking, and the constant, profound relief of knowing I was safe. Lila and Mark's downfall was total and systemic. Mark, the life coach, lost his business, his reputation, and his freedom. The FBI used the wire fraud case to show his client base that his entire facade was based on deceit. Lila's fate was more complex. She managed to secure a plea deal, avoiding serious prison time, but she was hit with massive probation, crippling restitution payments, and a permanent felony marker on her financial record. She lost her real estate license. She lost her social standing. Her entire world, which was built on perception and credit, was functionally destroyed. She tried reaching out once, months later, after her release. A text from an unknown number. Lila. You know I was right, Ethan. You're too afraid of commitment. You ruined us because you needed control. That final pathetic attempt to gaslight me, even after being convicted? I just smiled. I didn't reply. I looked out at the Tahoe forest, the quiet of the pines pressing in around me. I had all the control I needed. I realized I hadn't just won a divorce. I had won the war for my own mind. She thought my quiet nature was stupidity. I proved that my silence was the perfect camouflage for my expertise. The final score was clean. I kept my assets, and she was assigned the full liability of her own choices. I found a new partner eventually, someone who works in environmental science. She understands data, she understands security, and she understands that trust is built on integrity, not on convenience. I never worried about my financial perimeter again. Why would I? I'm the one who designs the protocols. The money I recovered was well worth the cost of the biometric scanner. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's simply securing your system and letting the criminal enterprise self-destruct.